Greetings, one and all. A message for Wednesday, April 22nd, Earth Day. Actually, it's Earth Day. So this message I've called fine-tuning. As we spend time delving into the resurrection experiences from their biblical source, I'm asking you to consider them from your own perspective. Ultimately, the teaching and the preaching of Scripture is to encourage our application. How do I apply this scriptural wisdom to my living? While it may be easy for us to be critical of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus, not recognizing Jesus right off, I wonder if we would recognize him. Where do you expect to meet Jesus? I think of the hymn by Fred Kahn, "We meet you, O Christ," and I'll just quote, "We meet you, O Christ, in many a guise. Your image we see in simple and wise. You live in a palace, exist in a shack. We see you the gardener, a tree on your back. In millions alive, away and abroad, involved in our life, you live down the road. Imprisoned in systems, you long to be free. We witness you, Jesus, still bearing your tree." These wise words remind us that the risen Christ has many images, many guises, and if our hope is to recognize him by what he looks like, our own prejudice might lead us astray. I think of all of those pictures of the fair-haired, blue-eyed Jesus as a starting point for our misled images. We might say to ourselves, if the disciples had a hard time recognizing him, and they had known him in the flesh, how will we ever be able to? It may seem a daunting task, but not unsurmountable. I want to call it fine-tuning. So we need to tune ourselves in. If you play an instrument, you know very well what a well-tuned instrument sounds like. A well-tuned instrument at its best reaches that melodic feeling desired. You know when it just sings. And an untuned instrument creates this feeling of discord. Perhaps you don't play an instrument and that illustration doesn't work for you. So let's think about a radio. A radio, not quite on the station or losing that station, has that crackle, that agitating kind of white scratchy noise. In contrast, the soothing sounds that come from an FM channel are delightful. We know when something is fine-tuned or not. So how do we fine-tune ourselves into knowing the Christ? How do we dial in the Christ and tune out the discord? If we know and understand Christ's teachings, then we will know those areas he would be involved in. We know where to look. Knowing Christ could be like any other relationship. You know your friend well enough to know what they would be involved with and what they would not be involved in. We might know that someone walks at the Healthy Living Center or has coffee at a certain time or a certain place. When someone speaks about a friend unkindly, you might say, well, that doesn't sound like the person I know. Knowing. I think it's all about knowing. In the resurrection appearances, the disciples all finally recognized Jesus in something that was familiar to them. For Mary, it was Jesus' voice. For others, it was words he spoke. And for others, it was in his actions, like the breaking of bread. In the resurrection appearances, they did finally recognize him. And it was that sense of knowing where the light went on. Many people are making more phone calls in these days of staying home, so we are learning and relearning the sounds of people's voices. And we're even hearing and learning and relearning phone numbers that perhaps we had forgotten. Knowing not to call it before 10 o'clock in the morning, or knowing not to call after 9 o'clock at night. When you are in a relationship with someone, you know these things about them. Knowing Christ is important as in knowing a good friend. It's important in our attempts to live as He would have us live. Let's take some time to develop a relationship with the risen Christ in order that we might know Him in whatever guise He appears in. Thank you.